The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
I was raised in Guelph, Ontario, and I didn't really enjoy high school. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and one day a friend of the family's was over and talking about different things, and he said, "Oh, with your size and stature, you should consider joining the police force." And I guess one thing led to another, and why I chose the RCMP over the OPP or the city police, I'm really not sure. But our closest detachment was in Kitchener, which was about 18-20 miles away from Guelph. And anyway, I think it was probably a month or two later, I went over there, signed, and the process was started. And I think it was probably a little over a year later that I got the word that I had been accepted. Found my way to Toronto, the 3rd of July, 1964. Sworn in with 3 other fellows from Southern Ontario, and we were sent off to Ottawa that same day. Arrived later that afternoon, and taken to the dorm where I would spend the next 9 months. 16 of us lived in this one room, and all of our worldly possessions were kept in one trunk and a skinny little closet. I think it was about, 12, 14 inches wide. But I don't recall there being a problem storing your items, so obviously I didn't have a whole lot to worry about. And I guess the thing that you learned very quickly was that anytime you went anywhere, it was done at double time, and you got hollered at. Little different experience, but I was one of 32 in the troop, and I think to all of us, probably somewhat disillusioned, didn't quite know what to expect, so you kind of expected or accepted it. And life went on. First couple of days, we spent an awful lot of time with an individual by the name of Constable Major. I think I was one of those that thought this was some high-ranking individual. But in reality, he was simply a constable, and Major happened to be his surname. Little overweight and a very loud voice, and he seemed to get great joy out of harassing us new recruits. And he wasn't one of my favorite individuals while I was there, but once you got to know him, it became, well, you didn't take him too seriously, and found out he was a lowly constable and just a little bit higher than we were. And I think one of the things that sticks in my mind in training, you were always tired. There never seemed to be enough hours in a day to do everything. When I went through, training was 9 months. And it included riding, which I think we compressed into about the first 4.5 or 5 months. And although that created a lot of work, it probably also generated the most laughs. And of course, when I say laughs, as long as you weren't the one being harassed or falling off your horse, you know, inside you had a tough time concealing the laughter, but you didn't dare do it out loud. I remember two of the horses that I had in particular. First one, Titan, a big one of the coach horses, and one of his favorite tricks was to lay down and roll over on his back. Well, I was always concerned that when he laid down, I'd get my feet stuck in the stirrups or something, so you're always ready to pull your feet out. And anyway, when he'd start to go down, I'd start kicking the sides to try and keep him up, but that never seemed to help. Because, of course, every time he went down, I'd get help from the instructor for not controlling my horse. And, of course, when he rolled in the dirt, it simply made a heck of a mess of the saddle, and it made cleaning it that much more difficult. And then the next horse I had was Frisco. That was another of the coach horses. And no matter what you did, it was difficult to get him to canter. And when the instructors felt that I was putting in a good effort, they used to give me like a riding crop to get him to canter, and all you do is tickle his rump with that, and he would canter. But without that riding crop, it was almost impossible for me, someone who'd never ridden a horse other than maybe a farm horse a couple of times prior to that. Ended up at Regina Detachment. There was 3 of us. And of course, when we first reported to Saskatchewan, we had to report to the Sergeant Major at the training academy at Depot. And one of the first questions to one of the 3 of us was, do any of you have any relatives in Regina? And a fellow by the name of Alfie McKeel said that he had an aunt in Regina. So with that, it was decided that Alfie McKeel would get sent to Yorkton, and Jean Best and I would stay in Regina. And so we go to find our way down to Regina Detachment, which at that time was on the 5th floor of the post office building. And I think I was there about 4 or 5 days, and I was on the midnight shift, doing night patrols with a fellow by the name of Dan McKenzie. He had, I think, about 8 or 9 years service at that time. And we'd start work about 10 o'clock at night and finish at 6 in the morning. And after about my 4th or 5th shift, I was sleeping back in my room, and about 12 o'clock, 12:30, the NCO in charge of Regina Detachment came back and woke me up and told me I was transferred. I was off to Milestone. Well, having just arrived in Regina 4 or 5 days previous, I had no idea where Milestone was, and I found out it was about 30 miles south of Regina. Next question, when do I have to be there? Well, you're transferred today. So I had purchased a car before I left Ottawa. So after working all night, having about 3 or 4, maybe 5 hours sleep, I load everything into my trunk, take it downstairs, throw it in the back seat of my car, look at a road map, find out where Milestone is, and off I go. Arrived in Milestone, I think about 3 o'clock that afternoon, and there was just a corporal and I. I was living in barracks, and he lived in the house that adjoined the office. And it was a farming community. We had a main highway, the main highway heading south to the States, went through Milestone. but there wasn't a high crime area. And although it wasn't an overly busy spot, I probably put in an awful lot of hours cutting the grass 3 times a week. And I stayed at Milestone for about 4.5 months, and then I was transferred back to Regina Detachment temporarily. There had been a number of transfers, and there was 2 or 3 of us from the subdivision told they were short of bodies, so we were the temporary replacements. And within about 5 or 6 months, that became permanent. So I ended up spending probably a couple of years at Regina Detachment. Got a little more police work, but there was also a lot of jobs that weren't people's favorite tasks. Like we had, every day you had to have a guard at the Bank of Canada. There was always one person on the plane flying prisoners from Regina up to Prince Albert. There would always be another one with the Provo van, picking up prisoners at the jail, taking them to court, that sort of thing. You'd get things like citizenship court, where they required someone in red serge. So a lot of Joe jobs, as we referred to them as. And I was then transferred to Regina Highway Patrol, which was just down the hall, where I worked predominantly traffic for about 3 years. And that was a little better. A lot of it was just you generate, go out and see what's out there and why. And but the nice thing was when you were on Regina Highway Patrol, the time off improved. In Regina, on the detachment, you would get 1 day a week, and if it got canceled, well, that was just unfortunate. On Highway Patrol, you got 1 day 1 week and 2 days the next, so that was quite an improvement. And I had just recently been married when I was on Regina Patrol, so I certainly enjoyed the additional time off. But traffic wasn't really my favorite type of work, and so then I ended up getting transferred to Punashai, which was about 90 miles north and a little bit east of Regina. And that was a whole lot different detachment, very busy. There was a reserve north, south, east, and west of Punashai. The work was predominantly with the natives, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was my first exposure to the reason I joined the Mounted Police. Fairly high crime area, but I enjoyed the work, and I got along fairly well with the First Nations people. I spent just over 4 years there, and then I went to Big River, which was a community up northwest of Prince Albert. That was about a 6-man detachment. When I should have mentioned Punashai was, there was also six of us there. Up at Big River, a lot of logging. Again, fairly busy detachment. Anyway, after 2 years there, I was transferred to Moosomin, where I was to spend just over 10 years. And it was at that time that our oldest boy was just starting school, so I was thankful that I was in Moosomin at the time. I thought they had a pretty good school system there. And it was while I was at Moosomin that I got involved with various service clubs, got involved in the community with the minor and senior hockey, I served on the rec board for a number of years. Got involved with Kinsman, just a whole different aspect of things, and yet the fact that it was on number 1 highway, it was still a fairly busy detachment. When I went to Moosomin, I was promoted to corporal. After 8 years there, I was promoted to sergeant, so my last 2 years there, I was in charge of the detachment. And at that time, it was highly unusual for someone to spend that much time at one post. And so I was told that when I got promoted to sergeant that I would be leaving within a year or two. And I accepted that because I was thankful for all the time I did have there. From there I went to Melville, where I was to spend just over 6 years. And again, the work was similar to Moosomin, except you didn't have a major highway going through there. It was a railroad community. After 6 years there, I was transferred to Regina. At that time, our 2 sons were in university, and I thought it would fit our lifestyle at that time. When I did get into Regina, I had a desk job, and I quickly learned that that wasn't my cup of tea. I had a job that I could probably do in 2 or 3 hours a day, so I was always kind of looking for other things to do, and I actually farmed myself out to other units where I could lend a hand for a little bit of time here and there. One day I went into work and found that they were looking for volunteers for the former Yugoslavia to go and serve with the UN. And so I quickly filled out the necessary form, and the next day my boss asked me if I was serious about it, and he knew I wasn't happy sitting behind a desk, and I told him, I said, you send me there and I'd cut off my right arm for you. So I was one of those selected to go from Saskatchewan. That was to be a 6-month posting. And our role over there was to monitor the activities of the Serbian police force. The part that I was going into was probably 99% Serbian controlled because of what had gone on. Most of the Croats and Muslims had left the area, and they were concerned that the Serbs wouldn't treat everyone equally. And after about 2 or 3 months there, we found that, or there was some rumor that we may be allowed to extend our mission a further 6 months. So immediately I told my boss that I enjoyed what I was doing there, and if the opportunity did pan out, I would like the opportunity to stay the additional 6 months. And I wrote them a letter once a month to tell them some of the things that were going on. And in the end, it did come to fruition, and I was able to spend a total of 12 months there. In that time, my wife came over twice for a visit, and at Christmas time I was home for about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more, to spend the holidays with the family and see family and friends back here. The thing that I found difficult to get used to, everyone in Sector North, all the male adult men had an AK-47 or a Kalashnikov or some similar type of weapon, and I can still visualize a man riding an old bicycle, and he would have a Kalashnikov strapped across his shoulder. Like, they didn't go anywhere without their guns. Another member of the mounted police and I rented the second floor of a house that happened to be beside a small hotel. And when this hotel would close at night, it was not uncommon for someone to fire a few shots in the air. There wasn't a night that you didn't hear gunshots. And although the warring wasn't going on close to where we were stationed, I don't think there was a day went by that you didn't hear gunshots. And of course, everywhere we went, we had an interpreter with us. And I had got talking to one of our female interpreters when we were out one day, and she told me that a Serbian man's three most important possessions. The first was his gun. The second was his rakia, which is their form of homebrew. And the third was his wife. And when we would go out, we would stop and talk to the locals and try and determine what life was like, what were they short of because they couldn't get gas. Certain foods were limited. And you quickly noticed that they didn't treat the females quite the same we do in North America. It would always be the man that would come and speak to you, and the wife wouldn't get involved unless the husband almost encouraged her or asked her something like that. I think in some ways that was probably the best year of my service. I had a pretty good position over there, and we kind of called things as you saw it. The area I was in, if we compare it to, let's say, the southern part of Saskatchewan, we would have anything from 8 to 10 different detachments out there. And I oversaw the operational side of those detachments. And each day we would ask each of the detachments to send in a report as to what had gone on in the previous 24 hours, because there was always friction going on. And then each evening I had to put together a report and send in to Zagreb. And so I had the opportunity to travel around within that sector. There were a couple of occasions when we thought the fighting was getting too close, and if we felt that our people may be in danger, we would simply shut down the office and pull them out and move them to another community. And when we did decide to move to another community, we would find a house or a building that we felt was suitable, and then you turn it over to civil affairs, because their main concern was that when we rented a building, they wanted to make sure the money was going to the right people. And so we would identify a building and they would step in, and within normally 4 or 5 days, they would determine whether or not, yes, we could go ahead and utilize that. Towards the end of my stay there, we got involved with the Red Cross over there, distributing some of the aid that was coming in the way of certain foodstuffs and that sort of thing for the people, because like I say, with these sanctions, a lot of things weren't getting into the Serbian controlled sector. I think I just recently been transferred onto Regina Highway Patrol, and we had a report of a fatal auto accident out 15, 16 miles east of Regina. And that was before it was a 4-lane highway. And there had been a head-on collision with a fuel truck and a vehicle from Alberta. And of course, on impact, a fire had started, and by the time we got there, a good portion of the truck had burnt. The truck driver survived, and what happened, it appeared that the driver of this Alberta vehicle had fallen asleep, and the truck driver was actually on the shoulder of the road when the impact occurred, but no one got out of the car. And we always thought that there was 6 bodies in the car, because by the time we got there, of course, they were deceased. There were still some flames. But we could see 6 what appeared to be full-size bodies in the car. When it came time to take the bodies out of the car, we found that the lady sitting in the passenger's front seat actually had a baby wrapped up on her lap, and I guess that's something that bothered me for a long time, and that's one of those things I don't think I'll ever forget. The people coming out of training are much better prepared for what lies ahead. I know that when we were in training, all I seem to remember is you did everything at double time. We never got into this role playing, whereas now they have these scenarios where people are introduced to a domestic dispute a number of times before they even graduate from training. They go through mock situations where they actually arrest somebody and put the handcuffs on them, whereas in our case, it didn't happen until you were out in the real world. And we all know in a lot of those situations that things aren't always what you expect they should be, and you have to be prepared for the unexpected. Whereas the young people graduating today, they can anticipate some of the problems they may have and take steps to alleviate them. I think overall better prepared, but physically, they don't have it quite the same, and I sometimes wonder whether all that shouting and harassing us, I question what that accomplished.